Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is Election Day. If you've been waiting to vote, today is your day to vote. Now, again, I recognize a good number of you probably have already voted. Early voting has been off the charts. 30 million Americans have voted so far. And, of course, that doesn't count anybody in the last couple of hours that has voted. But if you are one of those that has not voted, then I encourage you, don't run to the polls right now. I don't want you to be standing in line at 8 o'clock when the polls are closing and wondering whether you'll be able to get in to vote. More importantly, I suspect most of you have already voted. So, you know what? It is time for you to think about who else you could get to the polls. You may have friends, neighbors, coworkers, family members that have not voted, and you've heard me tell the stories. If you listened to this program before, I've told the story of one individual who actually ended up with a tie vote. Happened in Ohio. I've actually collected a few since then, but this one was, I think, the all-time favorite because neither of his sons voted for him in that particular primary, so he lost. If either of his sons, one who lived at home with him, one lived across the street, had voted for him, he would actually be serving right now in Ohio in the city council, but that illustrates as well that sometimes even family members don't vote. So if you need any reason to talk about why this is such an important election, just consider the fact that we have had an enormous amount of money spent, and I have still tried to get numbers. I will in just a few minutes talk about how that money has been spent, but we certainly can conclude that we have about 31 million Americans that have voted. In just a few minutes, I'll give you some of the demographics, because it's been quite a surge of young voters and quite a surge of early voters and a number of other things that we will get into. But one of the pieces that came out recently, again, said after hundreds of campaign rallies, billions of dollars in donations, and I don't know if that's close, but that's the number that they're using in this particular article, and a nonstop blitz of TV advertising and polling that's been in full swing since summer, Election Day has arrived, and with it, a voters' midterm verdict on whether Republicans should vote or lose their grip in power is before us. You might also recognize that Democrats have been working towards this day since the moment Donald Trump was sworn in. They've waited 2 long years for a shot to win enough seats in Congress to cripple the president's agenda, which is certainly one of the things that they have been running on. And in the end, the elections will go one of 3 ways. Republicans will hold both chambers. I've talked about this before. I think that's less likely, but possible. Democrats will take a majority in both. I think that's less likely as well. But probably the most likely scenario is Democrats take the House and the Republicans take the Senate. Now, the reason I say that is this. We have 35 Senate seats up for grabs today, 36 gubernatorial seats, governor's races, and 435 races for the House of Representatives. The evidence is, and I'll give you those numbers again after a while because I think those are relevant, suggests that it is quite possible that Republicans will pick up maybe 2 or 3 seats held by Democrats in the Senate, but it's also possible that they could lose 2 or more of the seats that are held by Republicans. Arizona certainly comes to mind. So you can end up with a +1 for Republicans, maybe in a good day +2. You could say, well, if these numbers are going really crazy, you could come up with a 50-50 tie. I'm seeing less likelihood of that, but it's a possibility. When you go over to the House of Representatives, there are 435 House races. So how in the possibility could you predict it? Very simple. Most of these congressional races are in gerrymandered districts. I've jokingly said before that in the Senate, the voters choose their senators, but in the House members choose their voters. Some of these districts are almost impossible to overturn. They are so favoring the incumbent, either Republican or Democrat, that they are very safe districts. So as a result, even though we have 435 House races today, it's reasonable to say that maybe 30 to 35 of those particular cases are so-called toss-up, and that is where it could go either way. So once you understand that, and you understand that in order for Democrats to take control of the House, they have to turn 23 seats that were Republican into Democrat to get the requisite number 218. I think you can certainly say with certainty that either you're going to have Republicans with a slim minority, a very slim margin, or you're going to have Democrats with a very slim margin. But either way, there are going to be, in round numbers, about 218, 219, 220. It's just whether those 220 are Republican or Democrat. So we'll see how that plays out, but that's certainly what we find on the horizon at the moment. 35 Senate seats, 36 gubernatorial seats, and 435 House seats. Barack Obama the other day was in Illinois. He said, America's at a crossroads right now. It might be the most important election of my lifetime, maybe more important than 2008, which was quite a statement. Donald Trump has said something very similar. He said, I wanted this to be the most important election, but, 2016 was really important to me. But, both of these individuals, one president, one former president, have both been nonstop campaigning and really recognizing that there is a lot at stake, as illustrated by the fact that, as I said, 30 million people, now it's actually 31 million people have already voted, and we'll see what the final totals are when those polls close tonight. And for Democrats, the best shot at winning back, according to this particular commentary of the body of Congress, is where they need to net 23 seats for a majority. Whether they flip the House or not, Democrats are still expected to gain seats in the chamber given the favorable environment for Democrats. And that's favorable for two reasons. Number one, they would argue against Donald Trump and believe that there is some animosity towards Donald Trump. But more importantly, a number of Republicans who were actually chairing committees actually stepped down. I think some of them just said we'd had enough of this, or they didn't see any future, or maybe they were going to eventually lose their seat. So as a result, Republicans have had to, quote, defend a lot more open seats than before. Now, Republicans currently hold a slim 51-49 majority in the Senate, and Democrats have long aimed to win back control. But it will be more difficult for Democrats, it says in this commentary, to be victorious in the Senate by netting 2 seats, in part because of the large number of incumbent Democrats running for re-election in states won by Trump in 2016. So if you want to kind of think about this in terms of offense and defense, I don't want to talk about that after the Cowboys last night, but anyway, offense and defense. In a sense, the Republicans are playing defense in the House, and Democrats are playing defense in the Senate. So when we come back, we'll talk about some of the money spent, some of the votes, what it looks like, some predictions, and most importantly, we know we don't get a lot of calls during this hour, but let's just give you this opportunity. If you voted today, who did you vote for? Did you run into any lines there in the polling place? Love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd just like to leave a comment on our Facebook Live post, we will read those as well. And we just need to take a break. We will come back and talk a little bit more about what to expect in election 2018 right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day. Normally, midterm elections don't generate as much interest as president election years. That is not the case this year. Americans seem to understand that much is at stake in these elections. How will they turn out? I wrote an article months ago looking at various electoral possibilities and still feel it is a good overview of what will happen today and be reported on tonight. Consider these three scenarios. Scenario number one is where Republicans keep control of both the House and the Senate. A few months ago, this seemed unlikely, but is still a possibility. If so, the Democratic Party would be very frustrated concerning the time and money spent in the election cycle in an effort to win back the House of Representatives. The Republican majority in this case would be slim, and we'd see very few bold initiatives. A more likely scenario is where Democrats are able to get at least 23 seats currently held by Republicans and thereby gain control of the House of Representatives, but do not win back the Senate. In this case, Democrats in the various House committees will start investigations of Trump cabinet officers, and they may also even begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump. The House will try to pass some legislation, but a Republican-controlled Senate will not enact it. Therefore, we'll probably see even more gridlock in Washington than we've seen in the last 2 years. Scenario number three would be where Democrats win control of both the House and the Senate. For the next 2 years, we would see headline after headline about the conflict between Congress and the president. Moreover, a Senate controlled by Democrats would probably approve very few of President Trump's judicial appointments. These three scenarios illustrate why so many commentators believe this election today is so important and will determine America's future over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Have you voted? Who did you vote for? And what was your experience as you went to the polls? Did you have any difficulties? That's one thing we do want to know about. A little bit later, I'm going to report on that. There are almost always stories coming out about problems with the machines, problems with lines, problems with individuals that did not realize they were supposed to have a picture ID, whatever it might be. So we'll certainly cover some of that a little bit later. And I focused a lot of my time and attention over the last couple of weeks, because it's a national program, on, of course, national races. That would be Congress, that would be the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Yesterday, in the third hour, I know you don't necessarily hear this on this station because we only carry 2 hours in the local stations here, but we did cover a governor's race, and that was in the state of California. And for our California listeners, I think they appreciated hearing from John Cox. But let's just recognize that one of the other very important set of races are the gubernatorial seats, 35 races for governor, and at the same time, a lot of those which are, again, legislatures, which are either controlled by Republicans or Democrats. Now, one of the untold stories when Barack Obama was president was this. It turns out that as he was doing fairly well at the national level, at the same time, he was not necessarily pulling Democrats along with his coattails, and that is there were just an enormous number of seats in these state legislatures, as well as in these governor's offices, that actually flipped from being Democrat to Republican. So right now you have Republicans currently control about 33 governorships, with Democrats holding about 16. And with about 36 seats up this year, Democrats are likely to pick up at least something. So we'll see where that might be. They might eventually have 20 seats. We'll see where that goes. And, of course, you got some toss-up races, so we're going to have to see where that goes. But that will be something else that we might be watching. And for just a minute, for those of you that are going to be watching television tonight, let me give you kind of an overview here so that you know when these election polls close, Election Day polls close. Now, all the stations that carry this hour are all Central Time Zone, so I will translate all the Eastern Time Zone into Central Time Zone. And that is on the East Coast at 6 p.m., you will already see a good portion of the East Coast closing. That's everything from Vermont to the north to Georgia in the south. Then you have a few others close, which is odd, at 7:30. That's Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina. But really, by about 7:30 Eastern Time or 6:30 our time, we will see most of the eastern part of the United States actually closing. Then, rarely closely thereafter, at 7 p.m., now you pick up all sorts of other states. Some of the outliers were New Jersey, Pennsylvania, but you pick up most of the other parts of the Midwest, at least the eastern part of the Midwest, Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, things like that. So that all takes place pretty quickly. And then at 7:30, Arkansas joins them. And the only reason we don't have more is because in Texas, as well as many other states, they don't close until 8 p.m. But at 8 p.m., then most of the country will then have closed their polls, unless some are staying out a little bit longer. And that means that really by about 8 p.m., when you have at least many of the races which are not close, those will already be called. And so we'll have a pretty good idea at that point. As I've said before, I think we're going to see a Republican pickup in the Senate in North Dakota. There's a possibility of a pickup in Missouri, so we'll see where that one takes us. There's a possibility of a Republican holding in Tennessee. Of course, a Republican holding in Texas. That would be, of course, Ted Cruz. And so by 8 o'clock, there may be a possibility of having a pretty good idea of some of the trends. But now here's the really interesting part in all of this. To really get a sense of whether Democrats control the House or the Senate, a good number of those races that are going to, I think, determine whether or not Democrats actually control the House or Republicans retain control of the House are races in California. A lot of them in the middle part of California, in the Central Valley, and Southern California. Those polls do not close till, again, Central Time, till 10 p.m. Now, I don't know about you, but some people at 10 p.m. watch the news and then they go to bed. So that means we won't have even a slight idea of the possibility of whether or not Democrats or Republicans control the House, even if these races aren't that close until late in the evening. And I will make a prediction right now. I could be wrong, but I'll make a prediction that there will probably be possibly as many as 10 races that will be too close to call. By that I mean they may call them, but they may be within the margin of error, which allows for a recount. Sometimes recounts are perfunctory. Sometimes recounts actually overturn a particular decision. And so it is possible that when we are here tomorrow talking about these issues, and I've got Nick Pitts with me, we've got Gary Bauer on the phone, we still may not know who controls the House of Representatives, but we should know with some certainty, I would think, who would control the United States Senate. So I just wanted you to recognize that as you're watching this tonight, in some respects, you will have early on, possibly as early as shortly after 8 o'clock, a pretty good idea of where we stand in terms of the Senate races. Of course, the Nevada race, it doesn't close till 9 p.m., and I suspect that might be close. And Arizona is another one that may be close. So we might not know who is controlling the United States Senate, but I think it's a virtual certainty that even this time tomorrow, we may not know even who controls the House of Representatives. So we'll see where that goes. And again, a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have 23 seats that Democrats have to take from those seats which were previously held by Republicans. A good number of those are in places like California. And there's about, if you look at the rankings right now, at least 29 toss-up races. You can think and say, well, okay, 23 out of 29. Do you have to get 23 out of 29? No, there's some other places where you could pick those up. But nevertheless, some of those already are assumed to be Democrat. So we'll see where those go as well. Now, indeed, back to my commentary here that I'm reading from, it said if Democrats are victorious, the Trump administration will likely be in for a challenging 2019. You think? Should Democrats retake the House, there will be signs some in the conference may launch a push to impeach the president, though the leadership has not backed that effort. Nancy Pelosi has said if she becomes Speaker of the House, and that would be, I think, a foregone conclusion, that impeachment is not a priority, at least not until Special Counsel Robert Mueller announces his conclusions from his particular probe. And isn't that interesting, before I get any further into some of the commentary, how many individuals months ago were thinking that Robert Mueller would actually release his findings a couple of weeks ago or even just this week so that it might influence the election? We haven't heard a lot from Robert Mueller, and it's kind of interesting to see where that goes as well. Then also, Donald Trump would face an avalanche of investigations into possibly his tax returns, his payments to Stormy Daniels, his relationship with Russia, and of course, as I've pointed out in a commentary that's airing today, that I also think that there would be a lot of Democrat leaders in various chairs that actually would want to begin investigations of various cabinet officers. Which brings me to one name we've heard a lot about over the last couple of months. That's Representative Maxine Waters. She's a Democrat from California. She would most likely be elevated as the chairwoman or chairperson of the House Financial Services Committee. She serves as the ranking member. Another individual, Adam Schiff, who would actually be then the chairperson of the House Intelligence Committee, where he's a ranking member. And, of course, Nancy Pelosi would be the speaker. Those, if you are following their actions, should send some chills up and down your spine. And so as we come to a break, let me once again say there are some very significant consequences to whether or not the House is controlled by Republicans or Democrats, if for no other reason, just simply looking at what indeed could happen with some of those people that would be chairing those committees and some of the kind of investigation. And if you'd like to read it, my commentary today is called The Midterm Election, obviously. And what I try to do is give you three scenarios. When I come back, I'll give those to you if you have not had a chance to read it. And, of course, I've already been alluding to what that might actually mean in terms of that. Then I want to talk about the number of people that are voting. We've had a surge of young voters. What does that mean? And then looking at all of the money being spent, the literally millions of dollars, and how much goes to Republicans and how much goes to Democrats. I think some of that might surprise you. So we'll cover that right after these messages.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, well, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212 in studio. In just about a half an hour will be Colonel Alan West, and we'll also be hearing from Jonathan Saenz, who is the president of Texas Values, and just giving you kind of an overview here. But I thought in this 1 hour we'd spend a little bit of time just kind of giving you some of the background, some of which I'll cover again when Alan West is in here, and some of the others which we'll postpone a little bit later. But again, when we talk about early voting, as of at least Monday morning, we had 31 million people who had voted early nationwide. That is pretty amazing, and that's far more than the 19 million who voted early at this point during the 2014 midterms. Now, you might remember that those were significant as well because the Tea Party was still somewhat active. But nevertheless, you can see that that's still more than the 22 million early votes, even in the 2014 election. So what that might mean is that we're going to get heavy voter turnout. I think it's also possible that it might just mean that people are recognizing this is an important election, and they didn't want to wait to the last day. So they just simply move to do what I think is very convenient. Because when it used to be that we'd have to stand in long lines on Election Day unless we could come up with some reason to have to file an absentee ballot, then that is certainly the case. So we will find out whether or not this surge of early voting also translates into a surge of those who actually vote in record numbers. I think there's probably a reality that certainly we're going to see more people that have turned out for this midterm. But I also do believe that some of that has to do with simply moving the numbers from Election Day to earlier because of the convenience of early voting. If you look at the numbers, though, they are striking. Let me just take, first of all, obviously, since we're broadcasting in the state of Texas, that early voting in 2014, okay, that's 4 years ago, was about 1.5 million. And this time it's more than 4 million. So we're not just talking about doubling it. I mean, we're getting close to almost tripling the number of early votes in the state of Texas. That suggests that because you have Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz running against each other, and because of all the ads and because of the issue of Donald Trump, who not only is motivating people to vote, but motivating people to vote against him, because he is one of the most controversial figures in the political arena right now, you're seeing that show up rather dramatically. To give you a similar feel for this, again, we have in Georgia, we'll talk about this more next hour because I have my Georgia listeners with us, and that has doubled from less than 1 million 4 years ago to more than 2 million. And another one that's striking to me is in Florida. In round numbers, about 2.5 million 4 years ago, 4.5 million now. So you can see that there are certainly a lot of issues that are relevant. And one of those that's kind of intriguing is the issue of age. I heard a talk show host talking about this just the other day, and so I kind of dug into this a little bit. In at least 10 of these states that we can look at, and Texas is one of those, voters under the age of 30 make up a larger percentage of the early vote in this cycle than they did in 2014, possibly because of some of the individuals running, possibly because now they have matured a little bit more and maybe now have a job. Sometimes an 18-year-old might vote because out of obligation, but a lot of them might say, well, what difference does it make? Add 4 years to that, and they're 22, and they have a job, they're thinking about that a little more. Or take the obvious one, they've just graduated from college at the age of 21 or 22. From 22 to, say, 26, they might even be thinking about getting married, might have purchased a house. There are all sorts of other things that might cause them to think about voting, whereas before, just as they graduated from college, might not have thought about it. So in 4 states, Texas being one of those, and the other ones, Georgia, Nevada, and New Jersey, the share of the youth vote under 30 has roughly doubled compared to where it was in 2014. So the age factor is significant. And then when we look at some of the issues of so-called first-timers, that's pretty intriguing as well. You are seeing record numbers of first-timers showing up in places like Arizona, because that's a very competitive Senate race right now. North Dakota, that one, I'm pretty sure Kramer is going to beat Heitkamp, but again, a very controversial and well-publicized Senate race. Nevada, which is a very close race as well, the Republican there might lose. And so you start seeing some of these remarkable situations in which you've had a number of people who are voting for the very first time. And again, we have to recognize these are based on polls, and sometimes the polls aren't perfectly accurate, but they do give us at least a little bit of an indication here as well. And then when you look at the voting itself, in every single case, in every state I'm looking at here, you have more women voting than men. No surprise there. But in 4 states, Georgia, Florida, Kansas, and New Jersey, women comprise at least 10 percentage points more in the early vote than men. Now, could that be due to the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh, who's now Justice Kavanaugh? Could that be to the hashtag Me Too movement? Possibly. I think some people are going to read a little bit more into that than maybe is there, but it is very intriguing, to say the least, when you start looking at our early voting, to even see that the early voting numbers we have so far show that in many states, women outvote men by more than 10%, which I think is very significant as well. Here's one more to look at real quickly before we take a break, and that is, what about the early vote in terms of party affiliation? Now, it has still pretty much been the case that Republicans usually tend to early vote more, interestingly enough, than Democrats, and that was certainly the case 4 years ago. In round numbers, you could look at Florida. I'll just pick that as an example. 42% of Republicans, about 38% of Democrats. When you come to 2018, virtually a tie, 40-40. Not a big difference, but it illustrates a little bit of one. Let's take another one, Nevada, which, as I mentioned just a minute ago, is a very contentious Senate race right now. 4 years ago, it was about 45% Republican and about 36% Democrat. This time, more Democrats than Republicans, 40% Democrats, about 38% Republicans. So you are seeing kind of a surge, not only in the youth vote, but also in the Democrat vote. Another issue I thought I'd mention is that if you've seen any of these television ads, you wonder, who's paying for all those? Well, of course, a lot of that's raised by the various candidates from small donors. But one of the arguments that some people are making is that there's too much money in politics. Part of that has to do with the fact that these big donors don't have to limit what they can give personally. They can give through what are called 527 organizations and other groups and carry committees and the rest. I won't go into the details. But if you look at the individual top donors in this campaign cycle, I just have the first page here because it wears you out. But if you look at the top 7 donors, 5 of them gave 100% to Democrats or liberals. Only 2 of them gave 100% to Republicans or conservatives. Now, to be fair, the first one is Sheldon Adelson, and he is an individual that has in the past has supported, for example, Newt Gingrich, and one other name I don't even know. But when you look on the other 5, these are names we've run into before. Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, and the rest. And so, again, it just illustrates a point that we have this misperception. If I were to take this microphone right now, go out into the hallway and start interviewing people and saying, you know, there's a lot of money in politics. Where do you think some of these big donors are giving their money? I would imagine almost to a person they'd say, oh, well, they're giving it to the Republicans. Not so. 5 of the top 7 donors gave 100%, not 99%, but 100% to either Democrats or liberals. In most cases, that's the same thing. And you only had 2 of those top donors giving to Republicans or conservatives. So again, perception is certainly not always reality, and in that case, it's certainly very different. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, I'll cover 1 or 2 other issues, and then, of course, we're going to have Colonel Alan West in studio. We're going to spend some time first talking with him about the campaign and getting his own experience, having run for Congress. And then Jonathan Saenz will be joining us, president of Texas Values. We'll be talking about a conference that you might want to go to, but also talk about what's happening in the state of Texas and around the country on this election day. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. No one really likes getting a flu shot, but like it or not, for those in healthcare, it's often required. That was the policy of St. Vincent Health Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. Mandatory flu shots for all employees unless an employee can provide a medical or religious reason. The policy worked pretty well. If an employee had an exception, they were given a face mask, which they wore while interacting with patients. For those religious objectors, this was a great religious accommodation. But some employees didn't get an exception, even though they requested one for religious reasons. 6 of the employees who were denied an exception for religious reasons were fired, but the 14 employees citing medical reasons were not. Now, that's a problem. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stepped in on behalf of the fired employees, and now the hospital has to pay $300,000 to compensate the employees for their lost jobs. It's really too bad it had to come to this. The hospital had a great policy and a reasonable accommodation for employees with a religious objection to the vaccine, but they didn't follow their own policy and ended up treating religious employees unfairly. So, employers, let this be a good reminder. Have a policy that accommodates the religious beliefs of your employees, and then make sure you follow it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, let me just mention in the next hour, we're going to be talking with Alan West, who will be in studio with us, and Jonathan Saenz will be with us in about a half an hour. But I thought I'd bring him on right now if we could, since he had a few minutes, because one of the things I always like to do, especially when we're talking to primarily listeners in the state of Texas, although I recognize some of you listening are not in Texas, but the vast majority of you are, it gives us a chance to talk about some of these Texas values and, of course, how important it is to have the president of Texas Values, who has, of course, in the past also worked with Liberty Institute, a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin with his law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. And Jonathan, it's always a delight to have you on the program with us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
And again, we'll have you on in about a half an hour for the national audience. But I thought it would be helpful, first of all, to look at these races. But before we do so, one of the links we have is to texasvalues.org. And there's a Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala that's taking place on November 17th. You have invited me to participate. Of course, Kelly Shackelford will be there, but your keynote speaker is Michelle Bachmann. And so as people go to your website, this is a great opportunity after the election for people to actually participate, get to know a little bit more about the good work that you do there in Austin. But tell us a little bit more and why individuals listening right now need to go and get a ticket.
Absolutely. Well, if you go to the website, txvalues.org, TX like the state, values.org, you can order tickets today. You can reserve a table. You can do a sponsorship and get recognized in our program. This is an annual event that we do, and it rotates between Houston and Dallas. And so we did the event 2 years ago in Dallas and last year in Houston. So this will be our fourth time. And, our organization has been around for about 6 years. As you mentioned in the introduction, I used to work for Kelly Shackelford at Liberty Institute, which is now called First Liberty, did litigation work there, and also was their director of legislative affairs. And Kelly graciously and with a lot of foresight sent me down to Austin to be a voice and an advocate for faith and family at the Texas Capitol. And, it seemed like that was such a good idea. I thought we should open office down there. And after a period of time, we ended up just deciding to start our own organization. And so that's how Texas Values came about. And so we focus on the issues of faith, family, and freedom at Texas. So you'll hear more about that, though. Our Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala, we're going to have about 350 to 400 people there. This event sells out every year. It's going to be at the Four Seasons at Las Colinas, which is in Irving or Dallas, I guess, depending on who you ask. But a very popular venue. It's been remodeled and updated. The Four Seasons is just a beautiful location. But Michelle Bachmann is a former member of Congress. She also ran for president, and she now serves on the board of Family Research Council that does work nationally on the issues of faith, family, and freedom. But Michelle Bachmann has been a warrior for pro-life issues, for religious liberty, and marriage and family. She raised, if you will, 24 foster children. She's done a lot of work, and just a strong Christian warrior and witness. When Ted Cruz ran for U.S. Senate the first time in 2012, they called Ted Cruz the Michelle Bachmann of the Senate, if that gives you any idea of what she's all about and what she's like. And so, but she's going to have a very inspiring message about why the issues of faith, family, and freedom are so important. I think she just got back from a international trip from the Middle East. I saw her at Value Voters Summit up in D.C. recently when I was there. So we're very excited. But tickets are going fast. This event will sell out. txvalues.org. Get your tickets today for the Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala on November 17th, Saturday.
And again, we have a link to txvalues.org. I would encourage some of you to think about getting a table and inviting some of your friends. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And like I said, Four Seasons right there in Irving. Okay, you mentioned Ted Cruz. What about this? We have a U.S. Senate race. I don't think Ted Cruz thought that this was going to be this close. But I still see that most people looking at the polls believing that if the individuals listening here turn out or have already voted, that Ted Cruz will be reelected. But this has been a much more contentious and close Senate race than I think he might have expected just a year ago.
I think that's fair to say. And look, there's still time to vote. I mean, we're just about to 1 o'clock. There are 6 hours at least left to get to the polls. And keep this in mind. If you're in line at 7 o'clock, okay, so if you're running late or whatever and you just step into line at 6:59, just right up to 7 o'clock, if you're in line, they've got to let you vote. So don't think, oh, gosh, I don't have time to actually vote because there's already a line or I'm nervous. So if you get there and you're in line and it's 7 o'clock, you're still fine. So keep that in mind. Every vote's going to count. This race is incredibly important. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's historic, and not only in Texas but nationally. But there's no question that the race that's got the most attention, I think, as far as the Senate race, is the one right here in Texas. And a big part of that is because the amount of money that's been raised. Over $100 million between the two candidates has been raised. Now, Beto O'Rourke has raised a significant amount more than Senator Cruz. I don't know what the last count is, but a lot of people feel like a significant amount of that money has come from out of state. There are a lot of liberal folks that feel like they want to have an impact on the outcome of this race, because they want to make an example here in Texas and make some kind of dent. So you got a lot of money coming in from other parts of the country. So don't let you think that that's indicative of where the support is coming in from Texas. But there's no question, whatever People think about Beto O'Rourke. He has worked very hard. He's generated a lot of support. And so, I still expect Senator Cruz to win. But, you can't take anything for granted. I mean, I've seen elections come down to 4 votes. I mean, it can happen. And so I just encourage people to go vote and to not take anything for granted and think some of these races are a foregone conclusion, because they certainly are not.
Let's remind our listeners, because I borrowed these numbers from you, that one of the people that sits in studio, by the way, you're going to be in studio with me on Thursday. I'm looking forward to that. But one of the people that sits in studio with me is Matt Rinaldi, won by 23 votes. And, of course, you have one down there in the Harris, in Harris County, where it was even closer than that, like you said. So when people say, well, does my vote count? Well, just ask Matt if 23 votes, putting him back into the legislature, counts. And some of these races, for some of these others, Matt Shaheen, Matt Rinaldi, some of these races for Connie Burton and some of these people, I mean, we've had many of them in here, and they're saying this is really going to be close, and every vote counts. So make sure that you turn out. And I'm going to give you a chance to kind of rest your voice for a minute, because in about a half an hour, we're going to put you on with Alan West, and we're going to be on the national program. But I just wanted to use this as one opportunity to educate our listeners about the fact that there is going to be this Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala, Four Seasons Resort, Saturday, November 17th, and I think it's just going to be great. So go ahead.
I'm looking forward to it, and Matt Shaheen's going to be there, Matt Rinaldi. I do think Connie Burton's going to be there, Senator Kelly Hancock. If the Baylor game against TCU is scheduled earlier in the day, there's a good possibility that Attorney General Ken Paxton will be there. We're told that he's flipping the coin at the Baylor game, but they haven't scheduled the game yet. So but nonetheless, but we're going to have a packed house. We sold this event out the last time we did it in Dallas 2 years ago, and it's on a Saturday night. Kind of your last opportunity to really see a lot of good friends and really do something important for faith, family, and freedom. We are the largest statewide organization that focuses on these issues. We do it in the courts, the legislature, and in the media. And so while our good friend Kelly Shackelford works on cases across the country, every now and then there's a few court cases that we work on for some issues as well. But most of our work is primarily at the Texas Capitol. That's why our office is 2 blocks from the Capitol. But we have someone in every county, in all 254 counties in Texas, that support us or are part of our work in some way. So we've got about 10 members of our team. So we're a legitimate, large statewide organization. And so I think it's the best return on your investment. But you'll hear all the highlights. You'll see friends. You'll meet new people and get to spend some time with special people like Michelle Bachmann, with somebody named Kerby Anderson, and also Kelly Shackelford. So we're looking forward to it.
All right, again, txvalues.org. We have a link there. You can see the event hosts, and it's kind of a who's who of people we've interviewed, including, of course, Jonathan. We'll let you take a short break, and in about half an hour, we're going to have you on the national program. So thank you for joining us.
All right.
Let's take a break right now. When we come back, Colonel Alan West, he's already here. He'll be sitting in studio. We'll be looking at election 2018. All that coming up right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is Election Day, and this is a very important election, as you well know. 35 U.S. Senate seats up for grabs, 36 gubernatorial races, which we'll just mention, but we'll also focus on the 435 House seats up for grabs today. And again, you might say, well, what could happen? Well, it is possible that if Democrats are able to convert 23 seats that have been held by Republicans, then Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House, and Maxine Waters is running the Finance Committee, and you have all sorts of individuals that you probably would not want in positions of leadership running the House of Representatives. What about the Republicans? Well, they might actually pick up a seat here or there, so we'll see how that goes. And so just to try to get some perspective on that, we have in studio with us Colonel Alan West, and always great to have you in studio.
Kerby, it's a pleasure. It really is.
And again, this is important. Anytime people wonder whether or not this is important to the American people, we have 31 million Americans that have already voted. Mm-hmm. This exceeds dramatically. I think it was 19 million who voted at this time 4 years ago in the 2014 midterms, and that's where we had kind of some of the various conservative groups, Tea Party groups, and others. You look at some of the numbers in the state of Texas, for example, where we're broadcasting from. You had 4 years ago about 1.5 million people voted. This time more than 4 million. You've represented the state of Florida. That went from about 2.2 and 2.7 million to over 4.5 million. So some remarkable increases in the number of people that have voted. I don't know what that means, but maybe you have some thoughts.
Well, the thing is that normally the midterm election cycle is really for policy wonks, people that understand the legislative process. Most folks in the presidential election cycle is image driven, and a lot of people come out to vote for that top of the ticket person. But what you have seen since President Trump came along is that the liberal progressive media has just been hammering this, hammering, and talking about, this is our opportunity to, the first chance we get to go after Trump. And so they have really made it about him, and they're not talking about the economy. I always ask people, when was the last time you heard about ISIS?
Yeah.
I mean, it's completely gone.
Yeah.
And so they have driven out a lot of folks, but the enthusiasm gap really closed when the Democrats overreached in the Kavanaugh hearing. That was absolutely repulsive and appalling to a lot of people. And now we're all of a sudden seeing that, yes, there have been several of these women who have now come forward and said, well, I made it up. I was just lying or whatever. And people haven't forgotten that. So there's an incredible enthusiasm out there on both sides. On one side, it is all about hatred of a person. I don't know if that can sustain you. The other side, it is about, things are going great. And we do not want to see this coercion, intimidation, violence. We like to see what's happening with our economy, oil and gas industry, production, manufacturing. Our foreign policy is strong. Our national security, we're rebuilding our capability and capacity. So it really is about the issues.
Yes. I might just mention that your new book is out. Let's mention that for just a minute, and we have a link here as well.
Hold Texas, Hold the Nation, Victory or Death. And it is interesting what you see happening in Texas because the demographic shift is leading to an ideological shift. You remember when Governor Rick Perry was going around the country to all of these, failing economic states and saying, come to Texas, bring your business, bring your corporation. We got things going on right here because we have the right policies. Well, kind of like Lot's wife. They're bringing Sodom and Gomorrah with them, and they're not leaving it back. And, we're all going to get turned to a pillar of salt. So when you think about why is Toyota coming here, the leaders of these corporations, they understand why, but they're not telling the employees.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see, someone like Robert Francis O'Rourke, really challenging Senator Ted Cruz here in the Lone Star State. So you talk about the policies that are making Texas great. You talk about the history that has made Texas great. We need to make sure that we have that billboard up there that says, "Welcome to Texas. Now, why are you here?"
Yeah, why are you here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, follow some of those policies. Again, some very important races that are taking place around the country, and we're going to spotlight some of those in the next 2 hours. But also, I might just mention Jonathan Saenz will be with us a little bit later this hour because he is the president of Texas Values. We're going to be talking about some events and talking about those races in Texas as well as around the country. But I'd love to, just before we take a break, have you talk a little bit about having run for Congress. What's that like? I mean, here you've been, I imagine, all sorts of congressional candidates in 435 House races and 35 different Senate races. They've been traveling around, going and meeting the voters. Now it's Election Day. What's that like for you?
Well, imagine doing a marathon, a half marathon, and you come around, this is that last kick. And I can tell you that on Election Day, I wake up, go do my early morning run to just, get my mental, state in the right place. And then you may have to go out and you're having breakfast at some place and meeting people, but you're going to hit every single voting location in that congressional district.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you're going to have that watch party late at night, and hopefully the things come out okay.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect some of you might want to tell us that you voted or who you voted for, what you've experienced. Were there long lines in your polling place? If you'd like to join us, that is the case. And in just a few minutes, we want to talk with Jonathan Saenz. But since I have somebody in the military here, Saturday Night Live, I just had to get at least a comment. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, there are always times in which Saturday Night Live goes overboard. This one certainly is, where an individual by the name of Pete Davidson plays kind of a crazy guy, and he makes fun of Dan Crenshaw. Now, Dan Crenshaw is running in the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Texas. He's missing an eye because of an IED that blew up. But I kind of love what Dan Crenshaw, he's a class act, by the way. He said, "I try hard not to offend. I try harder not to be offended." That being said, I hope that Saturday Night Live recognizes that vets don't deserve to see their wounds used as punchlines for bad jokes. A wounded warrior being made fun of at Saturday Night Live, that's pretty low, don't you think?
Absolutely low. It's despicable. It's unconscionable. And the thing is that this was planned. This was something that someone wrote into a script,
right? And
they reviewed it. They uploaded it into a teleprompter. They took his image. They put it up there for that screenshot. There are many different gates where someone could have said, we probably should not be doing this.
Yeah.
And my dad was a disabled veteran from World War II. My older brother was a disabled veteran from Vietnam.
Yes.
This cannot be, we cannot tolerate this. And this is one of those little things that happen Saturday night. It can affect an election on Tuesday because people sit back and say, I don't want to side with those type of people.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to open the phones and give some of you a chance to join our conversation. Perhaps you didn't watch Saturday Night Live. Not a lot of people are these days, but you probably heard about it.
And even fewer are going to be watching it now.
And, sir, that is the case. When we come back, I want to get into some other issues as well. Of course, 31 million people have already voted, but we've been talking about the incredible amount of money.
Yes.
And I'm looking down the list, and maybe I'll get you and Jonathan to respond to this. I took the top 7 here. And Michael Bloomberg,
Tom Steyer, George Soros, Bloomberg.
Yeah, it's just, you know. And you're always hearing, well, all this money in politics, it all goes to Republicans. Okay, I'll give you credit. Sheldon Adelson is on the top. But then from there on, 5 of the 7 gave 100% to the liberals and the Democrats. So the money that's been going, and even in the case of Texas, which we'll talk about in just a minute, $70 million. A
lot of money.
For Beto O'Rourke.
Bob.
Bob. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day. Normally, midterm elections don't generate as much interest as president election years. That is not the case this year. Americans seem to understand that much is at stake in these elections. How will they turn out? I wrote an article months ago looking at various electoral possibilities and still feel it is a good overview of what will happen today and be reported on tonight. Consider these three scenarios. Scenario number one is where Republicans keep control of both the House and the Senate. A few months ago, this seemed unlikely, but is still a possibility. If so, the Democratic Party would be very frustrated concerning the time and money spent in the election cycle in an effort to win back the House of Representatives. The Republican majority in this case would be slim, and we'd see very few bold initiatives. A more likely scenario is where Democrats are able to get at least 23 seats currently held by Republicans and thereby gain control of the House of Representatives, but do not win back the Senate. In this case, Democrats in the various House committees will start investigations of Trump cabinet officers, and they may also even begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump. The House will try to pass some legislation, but a Republican-controlled Senate will not enact it. Therefore, we'll probably see even more gridlock in Washington than we've seen in the last 2 years. Scenario number 3 would be where Democrats win control of both the House and the Senate. For the next 2 years, we would see headline after headline about the conflict between Congress and the president. Moreover, a Senate controlled by Democrats would probably approve very few of President Trump's judicial appointments. These three scenarios illustrate why so many commentators believe this election today is so important and will determine America's future over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, would love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Colonel Alan West. And in just a minute, we're going to be talking with Jonathan Saenz, who is the president of Texas Values. But just to finish this off, I don't begrudge anybody from contributing to a campaign. The Supreme Court, I think, wisely ruled that if you have free speech, that includes money.
Absolutely.
And so if that's where Tom Steyer or where George Soros wants to spend their money, fine. Now, the game's played in a sort of an unfair, sort of crazy way, because if you and I give too much to a candidate, we can be fined unless your name is Dinesh D'Souza, then you go to jail, I guess.
Yes.
But these people are using what are called 527 organizations, and Sheldon Adelson has given, of course, to Republicans. Tom Steyer is given just to Democrats. Michael Bloomberg is given $38 million to Democrats. Donald Sussman is given $22 million to Democrats. James Simons is given $18 million. George Soros, through the Soros Fund, is given $17 million, but I think through some of the other groups,
the
given,
Open Societies Foundation that he
that
has and everything. But also on top of that, you have to think about where are the political donations for a lot of these news media outlets.
Yeah, there's another one. Yeah,
there's another one, and then also look at what happens on our college and university campuses, those professors and what have you. So there's an incredible advantage. But the only good thing is that money does not assuage a bad message.
No, that's right.
It just doesn't. And
you've said that before. A good message is much better than all the money that Soros is spending.
It absolutely is.
And that's still going to work.
And I think that right now the American people get a sense that, I like the fact that I can take a vacation with my family. I like the fact that I can make, financial decisions on my own. But when I hear, the left is talking about health care now, if you want to have Medicare for everybody, then what happens for Medicare for the seniors, who is supposed to be for?
Right.
And then the other thing you have to realize is, something near and dear to our hearts. Why is it the only time the left likes the word choice is when it's to murder an unborn baby?
Yeah.
But when it comes to your choice for your own personal health care needs, we need
educational choice, healthcare choice. No. Can't make that decision.
You can't make that decision.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of your comments as well. Because some of you have some thoughts about whether you could vote for a candidate that's not pro-life, and some of those issues we want to put on the table. But let me bring to the microphone an individual that we're going to have in studio with us later in the week as well. Jonathan Saenz is the president of Texas Values. By the way, prior to that, he was heading up the Texas Capitol Austin Liberty Institute office and actually directed legislative affairs. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, has a law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. And Jonathan, always great to have you on the program with us.
Hey, Kerby, it's great to be on. Colonel West, good to hear you again.
Hey, Jonathan. Great to hear you.
We were talking about just a little bit ago these close elections. You've been really paying attention to some of those in the state of Texas, which I think apply across the nation. I know Matt Rinaldi sat in that very chair across from me. He won by 23 votes. I think you beat me on that. I think you found one where the election was won by, was it 4 votes?
Oh, goodness, yes. And so it's interesting you mentioned that. I'm sitting in my car at a polling location in Matt Rinaldi's district, as a matter of fact, in the Coppell area. And there's a lot of activity here, but that will pick up later in the day, particularly between the hours of 5 and 7. So, yes, a few years back, there was a race in Austin, and the incumbent now is Donna Howard, but she was being challenged in her Texas House seat by a guy who a lot of people knew. He was a former football player. His name is Dan Neal. He played offensive guard for the Denver Broncos. He was, I think, All-American at University of Texas, won the Super Bowl with the Broncos, and so very well known in the Austin area, really nice, hardworking, engaging guy. And so he ran against Donna Howard in a district that at that time was kind of 50-50. I don't know what it's like now. This was probably 10, 12 years ago. And he lost by 4 votes. I mean,
4 votes. 4 votes.
One family.
People don't think it can happen, but it can. And I don't know what it's going to come down to in Matt Rinaldi's race. Other people that are on the ballot that are getting a lot of attention, Lisa Luby Ryan. I mean, a lot of races in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the statewide in Texas, that they're going to be very close.
And nationwide, Missouri, Nevada, Florida.
Well, you got Dave Bratt has an interesting race there in Virginia. I mean, and also, I think it's Andy Carr, I believe, in Kentucky.
Culbertson in Texas.
Culberson.
Yes.
I mean, right here, Pete Sessions has a tight race against Colin Allred. So it's incredible, like Kerby and I were talking about earlier, this demographic shift and the ideological shift that you see happening in Texas. And it's surprising to a lot of folks because there are people that are conservatives moving to Texas, and there's like, what's the difference? I should have just stayed where I was. but I think that, you will see folks that here in the state say, look, there's a reason why Texas is so economically vibrant. And there's a reason why you're relocating here. And I think we just need to educate people on that. And people need an education on the history, not just being taught to the kids, but a lot of the adults need to understand Texas history.
Let me take some phone calls along the way because we have some great guests here, but I also want to hear from you. And I think one of you wanted to talk about the Saturday Night Live sketch that we talked about just a minute ago. Let's head out to California, KYCC. Leslie, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I think I saw the SNL thing on Tucker Carlson and on Hannity, and I thought that was the worst skits possible. We should not be treating our veterans or our servicemen that way. I'm too patriotic for that. And also, I did vote for Republicans, and I'm proud of it. And I'm very scared of the caravans that are coming through. We need to put up the borders. We need to reestablish what our immigration policies are, because I do not want to keep on paying for all these illegal immigrants that are coming through. I can't survive on my own paycheck, and I'm retired now. and it's not fair to American citizens.
Yeah, I got a question. What part of California are you in? Because there's some very critical congressional races.
I'm in the Sacramento. I'm in the Amador County, which is an hour and 15 minutes from Sacramento, which is southeast.
Okay, because I know that over in the Central Valley and Fresno area, that's a big key race.
They're way too far from us.
Okay, and then down, of course, in Orange County.
Yeah, in Orange County.
That's huge because they're counting on, I think, like 4, maybe 5 congressional races out there to flip them. That's key in that equation to get to that 23-24.
Let me just mention that for just a minute. Those of you watching television tonight, and then we'll come back and spend some more time talking about some of these races and even some of these close races. Tonight, the polls close at different times, as everybody is well aware. So let me use Eastern time zone, and then you can translate. But the first polls close at 7 p.m. Eastern time, which would be, of course, 6 p.m., which would be Central Time, or 5 p.m. Mountain Time, or 4 p.m. California time. And that then from Vermont to Georgia, those are already closed. Then you have a few others that close shortly thereafter. You have a 7:30 time and 8 o'clock. Then most of the Northeast and the Midwest are then closed from Pennsylvania all the way to Oklahoma and Missouri. And then you have, of course, by 9 p.m. Eastern time, most of the nation that's either in the Eastern time zone, Central time zone, some in the Mountain time zone are closed. But here's the issue. Most of the really important races that might determine whether Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House or not are in California. It does not close till 11 p.m. Eastern time. So it is quite possible, Alan West and Jonathan Saenz, that this time tomorrow, we still may not know who is in control of the House of Representatives. I think we'll have a pretty good idea of whether or not Republicans retain control of the Senate, which I think is probably going to happen. But we probably will not know, especially if some of those races are really close and they have to have a recount.
You're absolutely right. And so there are some trends that we can see early on, but if it comes down to, those critical, congressional races out there in California, it may be, that another 48, 72 hours. Remember, I think it was a special election in Ohio this past August or so. I mean, it took about a week and a half before we finally got a victor in that one.
I might also mention our friends up there in Alaska, their polls do not close till 1 a.m. Eastern time zone.
I'm in bed.
Of course, again, some of you may be in the Central time zone, wherever you might be. But when we come back, let's, if we can, get into a couple more of those issues. But if you saw my commentary yesterday, I did talk about some of these close elections. And my all-time favorite, which is so sad, comes from my friend Penny Pullen, who it was a tie when she was running for re-election in a primary. So they flipped a coin. She lost. Lost on a coin toss. And then the rest of my story is she went to her church that Sunday, and at least a half a dozen to a dozen people came up and said, "Oh, Penny, if I'd known that it was going to be a close election, I got home late and I didn't go, or I was out of town, I didn't get an absentee vote. If just one of her church members had voted for her, Penny would still be in the Illinois legislature."
Incredible.
So some of these elections are pretty close. That's why you need to vote, and vote right now. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
It's an election day, and if you have not voted, go out and vote right now. Now, I recognize most of you Point of View listeners probably have voted, so your assignment now is to find 5 other people to get to the polls, friends, neighbors, coworkers, family members. Speaking of family members, I guess I should mention that the other close election that I've enjoyed, this comes from our listeners up there in Ohio. William Crawford ran against Gene Miller, and they did get an identical number of votes in that election, city council election. And that was very upsetting to William Crawford because It turned out that his two sons failed to vote that day. His son Jim lives across the street from him. His other son Andy is a college student who lives at home. Neither of them voted.
They're not in the will.
They're not in the will. So, again, go out and vote. And if you want election resources, we have those at pointofview.net. And we also point you to the various family policy groups. And the largest one in the nation is Texas Values. And Jonathan Saenz is the president of Texas Values. So, Jonathan, for just a minute, you, of course, have a voter's guide as you go to txvalues.org. But as people go there, some of our listeners might want to go to an event that we are participating in, and I appreciate you inviting me to participate as well. Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom. You have Michelle Bachmann speaking there. You, of course, have Kelly Shackelford and myself, but talk a little bit more about this event, because Michelle Bachmann has been in the news lately. Some people said, I don't know, might even be the next UN ambassador, but certainly she has been very much involved in Congress, ran for the presidency. Talk about what is taking place on November 17th.
Well, Kirby, I'm not saying I know anything, but the last time I was in D.C. in September, I saw Michelle Bachmann and Tony Perkins, the head of Family Research Council, walking over to a meeting with the president or vice president. So who knows what Michelle Bachmann will be doing next. But I can tell you one thing she will be doing. She will be keynoting the Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala on November 17th. That's at the Four Seasons at Las Colinas. Look, I welcome our friends from California. You want to make a trip to Texas and get a little bit of feel of the flavor and the fervor that we have for faith and family and what we like to call Texas values, come on in from other states, from wherever you're listening, because it's going to be a great event. This event sells out every year. It's going to be a packed house, and it's a way for us to book in the year, to tell people what's been going on and what the value they get on their investment. It's a great opportunity for us to raise money before we go into the state legislature, which starts in January of 2019. And people will be there, like Matt Rinaldi, state senators from the Texas area. And Michelle Bachmann is a dynamite speaker. If people don't remember, she served in Congress. She ended the 2015 term, was her last run, and she left that position. She ran for president at one point, and she's now on the board of Family Research Council. She is a dynamite speaker. You know, when Ted Cruz went into the Senate, they called him the Michelle Bachmann of the Senate. If that gives you some idea of her legacy and what she's all about. But she's pro-life as they come. She's a solid advocate for religious liberty and marriage and family. But the tickets are going fast. txvalues.org. Get your tickets today. That's November 17th, a Saturday night. We'd love to have as many folks there as we can.
I might mention you'll be in studio with us on Thursday, so we can talk more about that then. But you've worked with and served with Michelle Bachmann,
Absolutely.
haven't you?
Yeah, that was when we started the Tea Party Caucus. I mean, and a lot of people forget that was a constitutional conservative grassroots movement that was really focused on fiscal issues. I mean, TEA stood for taxed enough already. But what was so incredible, and when you talk about, a wave, that was a real red wave that happened in the 2010 midterm elections when the Republicans won 63 seats. That was the largest shift post-World War II. This is not going to be a wave that happens. There will be a little trickle, maybe a little ripple, but you still will have if the Democrats are successful, you still will have a very close majority. But the interesting thing would be, Kirby, if they do win the majority, there are many, I think 35 to 40 have said they're not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker.
Won't that be interesting?
That would be interesting.
Yeah, see how that plays out. And again, when you look
I want to chime in real quick, Kirby, because one of the callers before we went on break, they talked about this Saturday Night Live skit, and y'all might have covered this before I got on, but the person they were making fun of is a congressional candidate, and I think that race is a pretty strong red district, but who knows how it might be close. But this is the seat that Ted Poe is vacating, and Dan Crenshaw is a military veteran. He's a Navy SEAL, and he has an eye patch. He lost sight in his right eye when he was serving our country. I've had a chance and an opportunity to meet him. And so there was a skit by Saturday Night Live, I believe, over the weekend, really making fun of him and mocking him, I guess, for wearing an eye patch. And so you have to wonder, those things are just what you continue to see. Liberals, if you want to call it, whoever's making the decisions there at Saturday Night Live. But these things where people are overplaying their hand, we saw this play out in the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. You saw that, they thought that this was going to make Republicans and conservatives look bad, and it backfired. It generated all this enthusiasm by Republicans. And to Colonel West's point, we'll see how the elections turn out. But had it not been for that, I think the Democrats might have been in an even stronger position. And so there are key races at the congressional and state level. Of course, the U.S. Senate race that's probably getting some of the most attention is the Senate race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. $100 million collectively has been raised between the two of them. And so but with President Trump getting so involved, doing these rallies across the country, including one in Houston, that is going to have a big impact, and it's going to be real interesting. I mean, this is probably one of the most important elections that we've had, certainly, since 2010.
No, I couldn't agree more. And like you said, the left definitely overplayed their hand in the Kavanaugh hearing, and that whole enthusiasm gap just incredibly it closed. I mean, it's a parity. And when you look at early voting, which normally is where the Democrats are very dominant, Republicans are, right there with them. And in some places, they're beating the Democrats in early voting. And we know that Republicans normally do the best on Election Day. So,
I want to go around the round table before Jonathan has to go and talk about, are there clear choices here? When you talk about the economy, lots of times people say people vote their pocketbook. Are you better 2 years later than you were 2 years ago? I think most people would say yes, looking at median family income. When you look at the judges, certainly that's the case. Are there differences? As I look at most of these Senate races, there's almost always a pro-life candidate and a pro-choice or pro-abortion candidate. On issues of marriage, again, there seems to be a clear definition between those who believe in traditional values and those who do not. In many cases, and I'll use Texas as an example, seems to be a difference between whether or not you're going to build the wall or whether you're going to have an open border. So it seems to me that anybody's saying, well, it's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I don't think so.
No, it's not Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And this is how I try to draw the delineation. It is between the equality of opportunity and the equality of outcomes. When you have policies that are enabling people to get back to work and take care of themselves, or you can have policies that say, we're going to give you a universal basic income. We're just going to give you free money. That's a clear choice. And again, Medicare for all. Who's going to pay for Medicare for all? Right now, Medicare, Medicaid, they're running off the charts. So how are we going to do this? And, it was Ken Langone this morning on Mornings with Maria said something that was so very important. He said, if you listen to the Democrats, they're saying the exact same things that Hugo Chavez and others said when they came into power in Venezuela.
Wow.
And they took the richest country in Latin America, and now you have people eating out of garbage cans.
Jonathan, let me come to you, because one of the things people can get if they go to txvalues.org, and for our Texas listeners, they can get a general election voters guide even today. Of course, we've also posted links to all the other family policy groups. You're the largest in the nation, but you have looked at these voter guides for many, many years. There seems to be really clear choices, don't you think?
Oh, there's no question. And so the resource that we put out there is called freevotersguide.com. That's the kind of individual link that we use, freevotersguide.com.
Right.
And so, let's just take, for example, the Senate race in Texas. When you look at the record of Senator Ted Cruz, you look at the life issue. It's clear Senator Cruz has been very pro-life and Beto O'Rourke has not. But even more extreme, Beto O'Rourke supports late-term abortions. These are some of the most gruesome abortion procedures that happen in late stages where the baby is almost, full term, could almost be viable outside of the womb, partial birth abortion. Beto O'Rourke supports tax dollars being used to fund abortions. These, even amongst Democrats, can be very extreme positions. You look at the issues of religious liberties. We've got links showing that Beto O'Rourke does not support policies that keep men from going into women's bathrooms. There's just a whole host of things when you look at some of these other family and faith policy issues that are very important. California is boycotting. Their government was trying to boycott the state of Texas because our state passed a law that protects the religious freedom rights of adoption and foster care agencies that are trying to serve children based on faith-based beliefs. And so you see a lot of attention on what's happening in Texas, and you do see in this race, Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz. You see Ted Cruz coming down on the side of supporting the faith and family issues that a lot of Texans care about.
Yes. Well, Jonathan, I'm looking forward to getting you in studio. I know you're out there looking at some of the polling places, and thank you for joining us. Let me mention again that we have information about Texas Values, about this gala for those of you in Texas or nearby that would like to drive to it or get on an airplane and fly and hear Michelle Bachmann. Jonathan, thank you for being with us. See you on Thursday.
God bless y'all. Thank you.
We have Colonel Alan West in studio. I got a lot more to talk about with him right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. No one really likes getting a flu shot, but like it or not, for those in healthcare, it's often required. That was the policy of St. Vincent Health Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. Mandatory flu shots for all employees unless an employee can provide a medical or religious reason. The policy worked pretty well. If an employee had an exception, they were given a face mask, which they wore while interacting with patients. For those religious objectors, this was a great religious accommodation. But some employees didn't get an exception, even though they requested one for religious reasons. 6 of the employees who were denied an exception for religious reasons were fired, but the 14 employees citing medical reasons were not. Now, that's a problem. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stepped in on behalf of the fired employees, and now the hospital has to pay $300,000 to compensate the employees for their lost jobs. It's really too bad it had to come to this. The hospital had a great policy and a reasonable accommodation for employees with a religious objection to the vaccine, but they didn't follow their own policy and ended up treating religious employees unfairly. So, employers, let this be a good reminder. Have a policy that accommodates the religious beliefs of your employees, and then make sure you follow it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with me, Colonel Alan West. He'll be here for a few more minutes, and we're going to have an open line in the next hour. So if some of you want to call in and ask questions, make comments, endorsements, whatever you think you want to do, we'll certainly do that. Some of you were saying, okay, we just heard a minute ago from Jonathan Saenz about these family policy groups. Where can I find that on your website? Now, I suspect, again, most of you have already voted, but if in some cases you want to know more about that, as you go to our website, it again gives you this opportunity to get midterm election resources. You see a map there. Of course, you can click on that particular state that you're in, and then that will give you the national races and the statewide races. But if you know your zip code, and I hope you do, then it will actually go further down into some of the other races. But on the right-hand side, we have the iVoter Guide, but the second one is the State Voter Guide from Focus on the Family. And then if you click on that and go down, you have one for every single state. Mm-hmm. And, of course, this is helpful for all the way from Alabama all the way down to Wisconsin. And so you get those materials available there as well. Next hour, I'm going to spend some time talking about the Senate races in a little bit of detail, but I just had to ask Colonel Alan West about these governor's races. We have 35 Senate races, 36 governor's races. Mm-hmm. The state of Texas, it's kind of a done deal. We know that. California's a done deal. New York's a done deal. All the rest. Georgia and Florida.
Oh, boy.
Okay, I want to hear your comments.
My birth state and a state that I lived in for 11 years.
Yes, and you have lived in both of those,
yes.
And these have both been very contentious
yes.
gubernatorial races. Tell us what you've learned.
Well, the thing that has happened in Georgia, Atlanta has really become reflective of New York, New Jersey, and also California. Georgia now has, I think, the third largest movie production studio in the country outside of Hollywood and I think Wilmington, North Carolina. So inside Atlanta, inside 285 is different from the rest of Georgia.
Yes.
And, Stacey Abrams running there, her policies, her perspectives, she wants illegal immigrants to vote. And as we were sharing off camera, she even said, not understanding the importance of Georgia, that maybe we don't need to focus or be so concerned about agriculture.
Agriculture, which Georgia,
well,
peanuts, pecans,
the
peaches.
Secretary of Agriculture,
What?
it was a
What?
former governor of Georgia. So she's a little out of touch outside the Beltway. But you have someone like Oprah coming down.
That's right.
And stumping for her. And everything. But she is completely out of touch.
Of course, Donald Trump came there as well.
Absolutely. She's completely out of touch with the Georgia type of value. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think that outside of the Atlanta area, that will cause her not to be successful. Now, in Florida, it's very interesting because Gwen Graham, who was the Democrat that everyone figured would be the Democrat nominee, and her father was, the last Democrat governor down there. They figured she was a shoo-in. Well, this guy comes out of nowhere, the mayor of Tallahassee, backed by George Soros and Tom Steyer and also Bernie Sanders. His message, think about it, there's no state income tax in Florida. And the reason why you've had such success is a very, very low corporate tax. And now he wants to raise those things. What's going to happen economically there? So you have a lot of those, traditional, used to be the blue-collar Democrats. They're looking at this guy and they're saying, nah, I don't think so. That whole Gwen Graham camp. And I have not seen Miss Graham, former representative, out there stomping with Andrew Gillum, which, that's a very big indicator. So I think that it will be very close, but Ron DeSantis ends up pulling it out. And when you talk about time zones, remember the two heaviest blue counties in Florida are Palm Beach County and Broward County.
Right.
If it's still close, or even if DeSantis is ahead after Palm Beach and Broward counties have reported, forget about it, because the Panhandle is what's gets reported in the Central Time Zone. So
yeah, and again, just to look at that, we don't spend a lot of time talking about governor's races. Although yesterday we did talk with John Cox, who is running, of course, as the gubernatorial candidate in California. But right now, Republicans control 33 governorships, Democrats control 16. And, of course, you have these 36 seats up for grabs. So Democrats might pick up one or two. And then the other part of that, since we're a national show, we don't always talk about what's happening in the states. But it's worth pointing out that when Barack Obama was president, even though he was successful nationally, if you looked at what was happening in the legislatures and things like that, our listeners in Pennsylvania saw switches and things like that in the governor's races and the state Senate and the state representative races. And those are important because to use a good redistricting, number one, but also that's your farm club, isn't it, for the future? It is. That's how you build your future. But the thing that folks are looking at is 2020 will be the next census. And therefore, you have a redistricting in 2021. Yes. And so it's very important to get those governor's mansions and try to win more state legislatures. And guess who's focusing on that? A guy by the name of Eric Holder. Yes. Who's Eric Holder. That is absolutely That's one of his prime targets. Now, Hillary Clinton had trouble, or at least her host had trouble telling the difference between Eric Holder and an individual who is a senator from New Jersey. So that's well, whatever. Just had to bring that up just to watch your mind get a little bit crazy for a second. But again, when we look at the Senate, and just before we go, I want to talk about that. We have a lot of close races. Missouri, Nevada, Arizona, Indiana, Florida. And you might even put Montana in there. That's 6 races that will determine whether or not Donald Trump will continue to be able to put originalist judges on the federal court, the circuit court, and even, again, Supreme Court. So these Supreme Court nominations are really being held in large part at bay based upon what happens tonight in the Senate. Yeah, absolutely right. And I think another thing you look at is there's been a lot of rumor and innuendo out there about, changing cabinet members. Well, it will help you if you're going to change those cabinet members if you have a little bit more of a buffer over on the Senate side. So I think that's why President Trump has gone out and said, where do I really want to focus? If I do lose the House, but it's a still slim majority for the other side, I can still survive. But the Senate is where I really want to be able to pick up some steam because, the House just can't pass something and, it goes into effect. They do, control the purse strings, but you do have those, rules like budget reconciliation and everything that gives the Senate the
the upper chamber perspective. But it's going to be interesting to see in these close races, like you say, the Missouri, the Montana. North Dakota, I think, is pretty much so done.
It's done.
But Indiana,
Kramer won.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Indiana is another important one.
Yeah.
And whether or not we hold on in Arizona, that's an interesting race in Arizona.
Arizona's
and Sinema, I mean the Democrat there, she has run a poor campaign, but still. We just don't know how it will turn
McSally
out.
running against her. So again,
Tennessee, I think Marsha Blackburn is good.
I think Marsha Blackburn wins.
She should thank Taylor Swift for coming out and speaking out.
We saw
against
that
it.
one coming,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Well, again, we are going to take a break, and when we come back, it's an open line this last hour, so you can call in with your comments, questions, endorsements, whatever you would like to do. But before we go, I just thought I'd ask Colonel Alan West any predictions you might have for what you think might happen tonight.
I think the most viable one is that the Democrats do win a narrow majority in the House, 6 to 10 seats. I would say that they will be able to flip somewhere from 24 to maybe 30 of those seats over. But that's not going to give them this incredible blue wave. That's not going to give them a mandate, but they're going to think that it does, and they're going to overreach as always. They're not going to look at how do we improve the American way of life and standard of living. They're going to tie us up in hearings, investigations, and all of these things. And in 2 years, people will be completely repulsed by it, and they will, usher them out. And President Trump will win re-election, and then he'll get 2 to 3 more Supreme Court nominations.
If people want to know what that means Representative Maxine Waters is the chairwoman of the House Financial Services. That means that Adam Schiff is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
Gerald Nadler gets Judiciary Committee. He's already said that he's going to try to impeach Justice Brett Kavanaugh. On what grounds? I have no idea, but that's what their base wants. And their base does not understand civics, Kirby.
No.
So they think that they can just impeach Trump and he'll go away, like in 2 weeks.
Well, we'll educate everybody in the next hour. Thank you for spending some time with us today, and look forward to chatting with you by phone.
Absolutely.
Get
out and vote, folks.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and we want to hear from you now. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Election day, and if you'd like to join us, we would love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. What is happening in your neck of the woods? I know a lot of you wanted to just sit back and listen to Colonel Allen West, and so we wanted to leave this last hour kind of as an open line for you. If you can share with us some of the experiences you've had at the voting booths and things of that nature, we certainly would appreciate that. One of the ones that I documented earlier in the week is where this one particular candidate began to notice there was a problem at one of the polling areas, and that is voters were told that this is a Democratic voting location only. So if you're voting for a Republican or write-ins, you need to go north to another polling place. And so we've seen some of that. Matter of fact, talking about the fact that this particular situation was happening in a community church, and they were talking about how the pastor, the election judge, and even the poll watcher were advising voters on how to vote, looking over their shoulder, whispering on how and who to vote for. So we do have a few of those examples, hopefully few and far between, but we will see where that plays out. And again, we are talking about an election that today will determine 35 Senate seats, 36 gubernatorial seats, and 435 House seats. And, of course, as we've just alluded to, the Democrats, if they want to control the House of Representatives, will need to turn 23 seats or more that have been Republican to Democrat. And so in some respects, when you talk about the House, you're talking about Republicans sort of playing defense. On the other hand, when you talk about what is happening in the Senate, that's a little bit different, because in this particular case, incumbent Democrats are having to run for re-election in states which were won by Donald Trump in 2016. So in the Senate, Democrats are playing defense. In the House, Republicans are playing defense, and we'll see where that plays out. But again, if those 23-plus seats actually do convert, then that is going to be very different in terms of who will be in some of those House committee chairmanships, and so we'll talk about that as well. Just a minute ago, we were asking for the prediction from Colonel Allen West, so I thought for just a minute I might talk about my commentary today, which is available to you, in which I talk about kind of three different scenarios. I've written about this before. It appeared in the Outlook magazine, so maybe you've already seen it. But scenario number one is where Republicans keep control of both the House and the Senate. A few months ago, that didn't even look possible. I still think it's unlikely, but it's still a possibility because of the fact that when we do these polls in many of these congressional races, it's really difficult to determine who's going to turn out, how much turnout will take place. And as I will mention in just a minute, when you have 31 million people that have already voted, there's a higher turnout. Well, what does that mean? Does that help the Democrats? Does it help the Republicans? It varies from state to state, from congressional district to congressional district. But if nothing else, that is a possible scenario where Republicans still hold the House and the Senate. Even if they hold the House, it would be via a very, very slim minority indeed. There wouldn't be much of a margin for error. Even if the Republicans did control that, the Speaker of the House might end up being a very timid Speaker of the House, so you're not going to get any kind of bold initiatives. The more likely scenario is the one I've been talking about, and it's the one that also we heard from Colonel Alan West just a few minutes ago, and that's where Democrats are able to get at least 23 seats. He predicted they could get up to 30, but we'll see. And if that's the case, then you would have a House of Representatives that is controlled by the Democrats and a Senate that is still controlled by the Republicans. In this case, of course, you're going to have all sorts of various House committees, maybe starting investigations of Trump cabinet officers, various hearings, maybe even impeachment proceedings against either Brett Kavanaugh or against President Trump. And the House might even try to pass some various kinds of pieces of legislation, but it's not going to make its way past a Republican-controlled Senate, nor, of course, would it be enacted or actually signed by President Donald Trump. So you're probably going to see even more gridlock than we've seen in the last few years. The third scenario is where Democrats control both the House and the Senate, and if that's the case, then you're going to have kind of almost an armed camp between Congress and the president. Almost every headline every day is going to be talking about the conflict between the Congress and the president. So that just gives you a little bit of a look at that. And if you'd like to read it, it's certainly relevant right now. By tomorrow, it will be irrelevant because we'll probably know who controls the Senate. Although, let me now spend just a few minutes talking about the fact that we may not know what we think we might want to know, and that is there is pretty good evidence indeed to suggest that some of the things that we thought might be resolved Tuesday night, tonight, may not be resolved. And that has to do with the fact, as I alluded to just a few minutes ago, these very important races that are close races and might determine whether or not Republicans retain control of the House or Democrats actually take over control of the House are in California. And California, actually, its polls do not close till 11 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, you have to translate this into the time zone you are doing. And so let me give you a pretty good sense of, if you're watching television tonight, how this is going to unfold. And that is, again, I'll use Eastern time zone. Of course, you have to subtract an hour if you're in the Central, 2 hours if you're in Mountain, and 3 hours if you're in Pacific, and even more so if you're our good friends up there in Alaska. But let's do a little bit of an analysis and recognize that we at 7 p.m. Eastern time will actually have quite a number of very important states closing, and that will be Vermont, Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia. So right off the bat, we'll be able to see, well, what's happening, for example, in Indiana. Because in Indiana, that's one of those very close races between Braun and Donnelly. And if indeed Braun wins, who's the Republican, then that would be a pick-up for the Republicans. If Donnelly retains, then it's status quo. Then you actually have something very interesting that some of the polls close at 7:30 Eastern time. That will be Ohio and West Virginia, North Carolina. So again, before we even get to 8 p.m. Eastern time, we will have quite a bit already that we'll be able to begin to look at and see its significance and whether or not those particular races are actually going to give us an idea of how the country is shifting. Then by 8 p.m. Eastern time, you'll have all sorts of other northeastern and even some of the Midwestern states closing, and that will help us understand what's happening, for example, in Missouri. That is going to be a case of, again, Hawley versus McCaskill, and so we'll kind of pay attention to that as well. And then certainly by 9 p.m. Eastern time, most of the country, that is most of the Eastern time zone, Central time zone, a lot of the Mountain will close. So we'll know fairly early what is happening in the Senate. But as I pointed out, it will take hours before we find out in the House. And it isn't until 1 a.m. Eastern time zone when Alaska and its polls finally close. So again, it's a big nation, and a lot of things will be happening as we move from east to west. We'll take a break, continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day. Normally, midterm elections don't generate as much interest as president election years. That is not the case this year. Americans seem to understand that much is at stake in these elections. How will they turn out? I wrote an article months ago looking at various electoral possibilities and still feel it is a good overview of what will happen today and be reported on tonight. Consider these three scenarios. Scenario number one is where Republicans keep control of both the House and the Senate. A few months ago, this seemed unlikely, but is still a possibility. If so, the Democratic Party would be very frustrated concerning the time and money spent in the election cycle in an effort to win back the House of Representatives. The Republican majority in this case would be slim, and we'd see very few bold initiatives. A more likely scenario is where Democrats are able to get at least 23 seats currently held by Republicans and thereby gain control of the House of Representatives, but do not win back the Senate. In this case, Democrats in the various House committees will start investigations of Trump cabinet officers, and they may also even begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump. The House will try to pass some legislation, but a Republican-controlled Senate will not enact it. Therefore, we'll probably see even more gridlock in Washington than we've seen in the last 2 years. Scenario number three would be where Democrats win control of both the House and the Senate. For the next 2 years, we would see headline after headline about the conflict between Congress and the president. Moreover, a Senate controlled by Democrats would probably approve very few of President Trump's judicial appointments. These three scenarios illustrate why so many commentators believe this election today is so important and will determine America's future over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's open up the phones, give you a chance to join our conversation. If you have already voted and maybe noticed some anomalies in the voting that is taking place, of course, we talked about this one particular place where they're saying, you know, if you're a Republican, you have to vote in a different location. No, that's not right. And, of course, we've had all sorts of reports coming in. And so if you've noticed a voting anomaly, I'd love to hear from you. Perhaps you've already voted and maybe have some predictions. We've already given you our predictions about the fact that we think Democrats will control the House and Republicans will retain control of the Senate. But perhaps you have some thoughts about this, or maybe you voted for one of these candidates we've been talking about. We certainly do welcome your phone calls. So give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll get to those calls in just a minute. But let me take on this issue of early voting because, again, even though I think sometimes there is the potential for problems with early voting, we all enjoy its convenience. And we have something that is, again, an anomaly. And that is we've had 31 million people that have already voted early nationwide. Now, when you recognize that early voting, maybe that includes some of the absentee voting that's allowed in some states and things of that nature. I don't know, but it's certainly, if you do an apples-to-apples comparison, you have to say something remarkable has taken place. 31 million people have voted nationwide, but they only had 19 million people who voted early at this point in the 2014 midterm elections 4 years ago. And even 22 million early voted in the 2014 election. So we've had something now that has never happened before. let me use, before I take some phone calls, a couple of comparisons. Texas, where I'm broadcasting from right now, 1.5 million people voted early in 2014. 4 million people voted early this time. We just talked about Florida just a minute ago because, after all, Colonel Allen West was a member of Congress out of Florida. And in Florida, you had about 2.8 million people voted early 4 years ago. 4.5 million people voted early this time. We have our listeners in Georgia. Less than 1 million people voted early 4 years ago. More than 2 million voted this time. So you start seeing some trends here, especially in some of these contentious Senate races. In Arizona, almost doubled. Nevada, almost doubled. Tennessee, essentially almost tripled, almost quadrupled in terms of the number of votes this time early. Now, it may not mean anything other than, well, people are deciding more and more that it's convenience. It may also have something to do with age. That is, in a number of these states, the early voters have been youngsters, which I thought was kind of interesting. In at least 10 of these states, voters under the age of 30 make up a larger percentage of early voting this time than they did in 2014. And in 4 states, those would be Texas, Georgia, Nevada, and New Jersey, the share of youth vote under 30 this cycle is virtually doubled what it was in 2014. So that's, I think, really kind of striking when we look at some of the things that are happening. Now, a good number of those early voters are youngsters who are first-time voters. And that is something else that I've sort of been looking at as well, because if you look at first-time voters, that percentage is rather dramatic. First-time voters in Arizona, 7.5%. First-time voters in North Dakota, 10%. That has, of course, been quite an interesting race between Kramer and Heitkamp, and I tend to believe now Kramer's probably going to win that race. Nevada, that's a big race between Heller and Rosen. Well, again, more than 10%, almost 11% there. Texas, Tennessee, Montana, Georgia, Florida, these are all races which are sometimes very significant races in which we've seen a much higher percentage of first-time voters ever before. There's another issue that I thought I might talk about, and that is the female vote. Because we, as you might have imagined, I can look down this chart and say that in virtually every single case, females tend to vote more than males. Women tend to vote more than men in various elections. But here's something interesting. If you look at least 4 of these states, that would be Georgia, Florida, Kansas, and New Jersey, women comprise at least 10 percentage points higher in terms of their votes than men. Now, why is that? Well, there could be lots of reasons. One could be a reaction to the Kavanaugh hearings. We just talked about those just a minute ago. There could be a number of women voting saying, I want to vote because I'm concerned about what I saw in the Kavanaugh hearings, either one way or the other. I felt that he was not treated fairly, or I felt that he was guilty and we did not get any kind of justice in that regard. Or it could be women turning out in higher numbers due to, say, the hashtag #MeToo movement. So that would certainly be the case. One of the things that is going to make it more difficult for some of the pollsters tonight on television is the fact that usually early voters tend to usually be Republican, and that has usually been the case. But that isn't necessarily the case this time. Let me use 2 examples. Florida, one we just talked about a minute ago. 4 years ago, Republicans outvoted Democrats in terms of the early vote. Republicans were about 42%, Democrats at about 38%. This time, a virtual tie. So, again, not a major shift, but a significant one in the fact that what you had in that case is many more Democrats early voting than before. When you go to Nevada, which, again, I said is really one of those really contested races between Heller and Rosen, back in 2004 in Nevada, about 38% Democrat and about 43% Republican. This time, the Democrats outvoted in terms of percentage the Republicans by about 40 to 38. So, again, that may be too many numbers for you, but it's, I think, an illustration of the fact that with this early voting, it's going to be much more difficult to predict what is going to take place. And so one of the reasons people are suggesting that there are a lot of people turning out are due to some of these very important trends. One of those, of course, is the economy. If you ask individuals, are you doing better now than you were 2 years ago? You would think that most people actually would say yes if they were at least looking at the numbers. Now, maybe their job hasn't changed. They don't feel like there's any difference. But when unemployment is at the lowest level it's been since 1969 for various groups, sometimes the lowest it's been forever, that's certainly the case. Or when you look at the median family income, when adjusted for inflation, it's the highest it's ever been. So one of those key issues is the economy. One of the others, though, that was not necessarily emphasized by Donald Trump was the issue of the economy, and instead actually has focused on immigration. One of the articles we've posted here actually came from some Republicans that have said Trump has hijacked the election. Instead of talking about the economy, he's talked about immigration. So again, as we open up the phones, I want to hear whether immigration was an important issue for you. Was the economy an important issue for you? One of the other issues that surface time and time again is the issue of judges. For those individuals that agreed with the kind of judges that Donald Trump has put forward, that was one more reason to go to the polls, although you would expect some of the Republicans might have backed off and said, well, he's doing a good job, so we won't show up. But the Kavanaugh hearings kind of changed all of that. On the other hand, you have individuals that are concerned about some of the judges that have been put in there. And so as a result, they're showing up at the polls because of the judges. And then the last one, and this one comes out of a piece by Guy Benson, which is saying that indeed what we're seeing is some people concerned about the prospect of a Speaker Pelosi, a Majority Leader Schumer. That causes some people to say, I'm going to show up so that does not happen. Others showing up because they want that to happen. So you can see that when you look at some of these so-called closing arguments, those have been very significant in terms of the turnout, and we are dealing with a record turnout, at least in terms of early voting. We won't know till tonight whether or not that translates into record turnouts for a midterm, but we'll see. And let's, again, as we go to a break now, mention that we're going to start taking your phone calls. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Some saying people are turning out in droves in some of those polling places. And if you'd like to give us a report, we'll be back right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Got a number of calls I'll get to in just a minute. But let me just mention that we have posted a couple of articles, one by David French, which I'll get to later if we have time, and that is what I call Democrats in the midterms. He said Democrats have not earned your vote, and I'll explain what he means by that. One of the others, which relates to some of the questions, and I see on my screen here people wanting to talk about that, whether or not Trump has hijacked the election. That was an article that came out based on the fact that House Speaker Paul Ryan actually called President Donald Trump on Sunday and said, don't talk about immigration, talk about the economy. Well, Donald Trump said, sorry, that's what I'm talking about. And so some of the Republicans felt that that might cause them to lose their particular races, although they had welcomed the initial talk of President Trump about the caravan, the migrant caravan, border security, and some of the rest. So we'll see where that plays out. But I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. And for those of you that are saying, I'm really tired of talking about elections, well, we'll do that tomorrow. We'll certainly probably still be doing a little bit on Thursday. But by next week, for sure, we're moving on to other topics because there's a lot of things we've postponed. And one of them that I want to spend some time on is how to talk to our atheist friends when they make arguments. How do we respond to them? How we can be more articulate in that regard. And so we want to certainly focus on that. We have a couple of book interviews and some other things I think you'll really enjoy. But right now it's election season, so let's talk about elections. Let's go to Tammy first in Georgia. I understand you're a first-time voter. Tell us the story, if you might.
Hi, yes. Well, I'm 47 years old. I actually registered as soon as I turned 18, and this is the first time I've actually felt, I guess, motivated or really cared about getting out there and voting this year.
Tell me why. I mean, you might certainly, up until now, had some opportunities to vote for, against Barack Obama, for, against Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, whatever. What caused you, after that many years, almost 30 years, of finally deciding this was an election to get voting?
Actually, I'd say a big part of it was watching the Kavanaugh hearings. That really just struck a nerve with me. I'm a mother of 3 boys and stepmother to 2 boys. And just the thought that, you know, anyone at any given time could accuse them of anything with you know, no evidence. And I didn't like the way it was being handled by the Democrats and all the protesting. And I had always, you know, growing up, felt myself leaning towards more democratic beliefs, as, you know, my entire family did. But I went in and voted Republican straight across the board. I was just outraged by all of it.
Well, again, you had reason to be questioning that because, as I reported yesterday, but let me mention it again because people don't always listen every day. On Friday, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, referred Judy Monroe-Lighton to the Justice Department and the FBI when she admitted that she just made up this story about Brett Kavanaugh and his friends sexually assaulting and raping her in the car. So that was completely made up. We sort of alluded to it earlier when we were talking with Colonel Alan West. But there is, again, one more piece of evidence that suggests that here, these statements that are made so cavalierly, that I always believe the women. Well, I want to believe the women, but sometimes people make things up. Sometimes there's false memories. And as you said, when you saw the hearings, it was such a circus. And if you want more of that, just elect those individuals that turned it into a circus. So, Tammy, I appreciate you calling in, and thank you for being so willing to share about why you finally decided to go to the polls and vote.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, appreciate you calling in. If you would like to join our conversation, that opens up a line. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We talked about immigration, so let me go to Kim in North Carolina. I think you wanted to talk about the immigration issues. Go for it.
Hi. Yeah, you asked if some of us were voting because of the immigration issues, and I know that Ryan has asked Trump not to talk about it, but for some of us it's really important. And to those of my friends who always say, well, open borders are best, and, you know, we should welcome in the poor, the tired, and hungry, like the Statue of Liberty says, to an extent, I agree, because my grandfather came in, my great-grandfather came in through Ellis Island as a Jewish immigrant from Hungary. He had to be vetted, and he had to have a trade to support himself, and he came in legally. He stood in line and took his place, and he came in that direction. But open borders, for those folks who believe in open borders, my question to them would be, do you lock your doors at night? Do you lock your car? And why is that? It's because you don't want anybody and everybody in your house. Not everybody has your best interests at mind. And certainly when you invite a guest into your home or into your country, there's some expectations that should be met, which is simple things like common courtesy and respect and understanding that you come in as a guest. And to demand certain things from the person who has invited you in, I think it's just ludicrous. It's just ill-mannered, to say the least. So having folks at the border to make sure that those folks that come in do it legally, stand in line like so many folks have done before, only makes sense in regards to the fact that we not only lock our car doors and our homes at night, because not everybody has good intentions.
That's very good. And again, fairness. I mean, just because you happen to be able to walk across the border or overstay your visa, what about the people that have been trying to do it legally and fairly and are waiting to come to this country and actually might make a greater contribution? Because as we've pointed out, we certainly right now have more jobs than we have people to fill them. But when you look at those jobs, they're going to be jobs from people that are probably college educated, technologically skilled, and those are the individuals you would want to bring in to fill those jobs. But when you have individuals that maybe don't even have a high school education, who simply because they're close to the border can walk across it, or got here somehow on some kind of visa, decided to overstay their visa and then apply for welfare, that doesn't seem fair to me either. So I think it's all sorts of issues related to that. And fairness is just one more I would put on the table. So, Kim, I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure, thank you.
Just before I get into another topic, let's stay on the subject of immigration for a minute. So in that regard, I will go to Richard in Georgia. Richard, I think you also wanted to talk about the issue of immigration.
Yes, I did.
Go for it.
I just like to say that I believe that immigration, greatly affects the economy. So when President Trump spoke of illegal immigration, then he was touching the topic of our economy, because the more illegal immigrants we have here, the more that drains our system, takes jobs away from other people that are citizens. And so, yes, it does affect our economy, and it appears to be a big, important topic to many people that I know anyway, voting Republican. So I believe they did a good thing.
I think so. Again, there's been a real debate. And if you've listened to the show, you know that Nick Pitts and I kind of go back and forth on that, because he sometimes will cite figures saying that immigrants really make a contribution to our society. And I say, I don't know. I've seen others that disagree with that. But the bottom line is when we don't even know how many people are here illegally, they used to use a number. Was it 11 million illegal immigrants in America? Now almost everybody's starting to say 22 million. When we can't even come up with the right number for the number of people that are here illegally, then it tells you we don't really know what kind of jobs they have. We don't know what kind of welfare benefits they may be able to obtain because they have a false ID. We don't know how they're being treated, because if they're here illegally, they probably are beneath and not necessarily visible for OSHA requirements and all sorts of other things and benefits. So, of course, you just simply don't know. And so that's why I think it is really important to say, until we can get a handle on this, we've got to do something to secure the border and make some wise decisions about an immigration policy that is obviously broken. Let's go to South Carolina. Richard, I think you had some comments about voting as well. I'd love to hear them. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm in the National Guard, and I just know that being that I've served overseas and I've served on the border, I know firsthand of the sacrifices that the men and women in uniform make for this country. So for people to, kind of go into the election with just the idea that we have to do it just because somebody else told me to, is not thinking of the long-range picture of the sacrifices that many have made in the uniform, and also with the fact that, this is the first time since I've been keeping track of presidents in the past that have actually kept their promises, and
Promises
we have
kept.
one that actually.
Yeah.
So that's just something I find that's been beneficial for our country.
Well, I appreciate that. We have to take a break, and we'll come back. We'll take some more phone calls. And I might just mention that Sunday is Veterans Day. Of course, on Monday, I've got a Veterans Day commentary coming out. Again, we salute those of you that have sacrificed so much so that we can vote today. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. No one really likes getting a flu shot, but like it or not, for those in healthcare, it's often required. That was the policy of St. Vincent Health Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. Mandatory flu shots for all employees unless an employee can provide a medical or religious reason. The policy worked pretty well. If an employee had an exception, they were given a face mask, which they wore while interacting with patients. For those religious objectors, this was a great religious accommodation. But some employees didn't get an exception, even though they requested one for religious reasons. 6 of the employees who were denied an exception for religious reasons were fired, but the 14 employees citing medical reasons were not. Now, that's a problem. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stepped in on behalf of the fired employees, and now the hospital has to pay $300,000 to compensate the employees for their lost jobs. It's really too bad it had to come to this. The hospital had a great policy and a reasonable accommodation for employees with a religious objection to the vaccine, but they didn't follow their own policy and ended up treating religious employees unfairly. So, employers, let this be a good reminder. Have a policy that accommodates the religious beliefs of your employees, and then make sure you follow it. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Texas, KCTA. Esther, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, sir. I'm just so happy to vote. And today, the person that gave me my number to input into the computer was a World War II veteran, and I was just so happy to be there. And I'm so happy to have been born in America, and it's wonderful that we have to show our ID, because that's a good thing for people to be able to be, accountable and to do the right thing.
Well, again, that's just, I think, if nothing else, it's a reminder. I appreciate Richard talking about that just a minute ago. And we certainly want to encourage everybody to recognize that the 100th anniversary of Veterans Day happens this Sunday. Pastors, are you listening? This would be a great message from the pulpit. But also, we'll have my commentary, which will come out on Monday, which is when we celebrate Veterans Day, at least on the day weekdays. But again, we should be grateful that we can vote. And when in the old days we used to see those in Afghanistan that would stand in line sometimes when there was gunfire in order to have the opportunity to vote. And then when so many individuals say, I'm not even going to register to vote, or I'm going to register to vote, but I'm not going to vote, or I don't want to be on jury duty, this is such a great privilege. And Esther, I appreciate you reminding us that it is a privilege and we should take it as a privilege. And it's just wonderful that you had a chance to get your number from a World War II veteran. So thank you for calling in today.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, but let me just mention that some of the articles we've posted today you might want to read. The first one, and I'll get into it in just a second, is called Democrats Have Not Earned Your Vote. It's by David French, and you've got to recognize that he's the classic never Trumper. I mean, he's a guy that almost ran against Donald Trump as an independent candidate, but he was talking about the fact that Democrats are saying, it's time for public hygiene. It's time to hold corrupt, self-aggrandizing politicians accountable. And he says, I agree. And then he says, okay, ask your Democratic candidate if he or she is willing to publicly condemn New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez, tried for public corruption and admonished by the Senate Ethics Committee for doing favors for wealthy contributors in exchange for lavish gifts. He says, Democrats claim that now is the time to reject the politics of personal destruction. And they say, well, look at the president, who, of course, said some things about Ted Cruz's father, his wife, and all the rest. He said, well, look at how your Democratic candidate handled Brett Kavanaugh. Did they credit implausible gang rape allegations, which we just pointed out a minute ago, turned out to be totally false? Did they presume his guilt and declare they believed survivors even without substantiation? Then he says, well, Democrats decry Republican extremism and alarmism. They look at wild claims about border caravan, wasteful troop deployments, things like that. They can condemn family separation. Well, again, ask your Democratic candidate where they stands on Hillary Clinton's rejection of civility, Cory Booker's call for protesters to get in the face of those Congress people, Eric Holder's declaration when they go, we kick them, or Maxine Waters' demand that if you see anybody from the cabinet in a restaurant, a department store, a gasoline station, you get out and create a crowd and push back on them, tell them they're not welcome anymore anywhere. And so the point he's making is the argument that's being made, we need to reject Donald Trump and Republicans. He's saying, maybe it's time, as we've talked about on this program so many times, let's get both parties to kind of clean up what's happening there, bring some level of conversation and civility into that. So again, that article you can read in its entirety, but I thought it was really good trying to fairly talk about what each side has been saying about the other, and I think honestly pointing out some of the things that we've talked about here on Point of View. We have a lesson on dealing with veterans. That goes back to the Saturday Night Live piece, which I thought was very well written. The whole question about whether or not Donald Trump should have focused on the economy or immigration. And the last one, which I'll just mention before I take some more phone calls, is written by Tim Alberta, who came in Politico. Did Beto blow it? This has to do with the individual, Congressman Robert Francis O'Rourke, who is running against Edward Cruz, who is, of course, known as Ted Cruz. Edward Raphael Cruz, right? That's what we use as the actual full name there. But the point is did he blow it? And that is, was it possible that even after spending what looks like about $70 million, he still could not win? And I think the reason for it is that he was just too liberal for Texas, and in many cases even more liberal on some of his stances than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. And so there's going to be a lot of this kind of writing that will show up after the election is over. I was struck by the fact that this was written actually 2 days ago, in which they were already assuming that Representative O'Rourke was going to lose and that Ted Cruz was going to win. You're going to see many more of those kind of stories coming out, and I wanted to post one of those for you to read and evaluate. Alan West thought it was a really good piece, so I thought, if nothing else, we'd post that on our website, pointofview.net. Let's go back to Georgia for just a few more minutes. We'll go to Tim first. Any comments there?
Yes, sir. I think we do have an immigration problem, and one thing is, we live in a nation that has laws and regulations that we live by. I don't understand why we think we should allow them to come in and not go by them. I do think we need maybe a better system that would let more come in the legal way. I think it's bogged down in paperwork. But, I also, 62 years old, I pay $1,200 a month for health insurance. And see people come into this country that haven't contributed any taxes. I've been paying taxes 45 years, and my biggest bill is health insurance. And they walk in here and get everything free and haven't contributed one thing to our nation. And, and it worries me, sir, with Christians. I've never seen, if these Democrats want to call themselves a Christian, how can they have so much hate in their heart for our president that they should have respect for, and he's the first president that's kept his word on, I'm going to do this if I get elected. And, this is a big election for us. I have to obey the law. Why shouldn't they have to obey the law on how to come into our country?
One of the things that was very interesting, Tim, is when they were doing some interviews with people that were in the Trump rallies, both in Indiana and then later in Missouri. One of the questions was, why are you supporting Donald Trump? And when they came to this issue of keeping his word, I was struck by the number of people that said he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And I think part of it was, even though that's not the biggest issue for any of us, it struck people as there is a good example of somebody who really kept his word, because we had at least Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, so, we want to go across party lines, who all said they were going to do that. And those 3 did not. Donald Trump said he would do it, and he did do it. And so even though that may not have been the biggest issue, not that many people probably voted for him because he was going to move the embassy, it just struck people as, here is a person who actually said he was going to do this and actually did it. And so that was one of those issues, along with regulations and economy and all the rest. But I was struck by the number of people that said moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I think it wasn't so much because it was such a big deal, other than the fact that it was keeping your word. And keeping your word, I think, means something to American people still. I have more callers than I have time. But you know what? There's always tomorrow. So if you'd like to join us, you can certainly make those phone calls. And you might want to call early. We always tend to get all the calls at the end. I'll spread them out a little bit more if you call a little bit earlier. And we'll be looking at tomorrow with Gary Bauer, even a call in with Alan West, what these vote totals look like. It's going to be fascinating. So we'll see you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.